Hi guys, as always, thanks for tuning in. I got another review coming at you today. This is the Sig P229 Elite, and it's going to be kind of a platform review for all the Sig 229s and maybe even the 226s. So if you're looking for information on those guns, you tuned into the right place. Now I will give you guys some caveats before we get started with this review. Caveat number one, I'm going to talk about concealability of this gun. Keep these things in mind. I easily conceal compact and sometimes full-size handguns because of my frame. So I don't have an issue hiding a full-size gun. Just know that going into this. I would not, a lot of people would not consider this a nice concealed handgun for most people, but I have zero issues hiding a gun this size. So if you're sensitive to weight, if you're sensitive to printing, if you're just not comfortable carrying a larger gun concealed at this point in your development, keep those things in mind as I start talking about concealability of this gun. It's specific to me and to my experience and to the way I dress and my frame type, okay? The next thing I will tell you is that this gun is modified. Ooh, there are modifications which you can already see probably if you got a keen eye. I'm gonna go ahead and come out of the gate saying this. I modify guns that I carry for a very specific reason, and my philosophy is out there on carrying modified guns, and it's just the way it is, guys. I'm not going to review only box stock guns. I don't get paid to do that. I don't have a gun shop like a lot of these reviewers out there do. I don't have, this is all coming out of my pocket. These are actual tools that I use, okay? It's not like I just take a gun out most of the time, unless it's a real lemon like you guys have seen on this channel before. I don't just take a gun out, rip a few hundred rounds through it, and then give you a review on it, okay? I have no biases, no sponsors, anything like that. This is just a genuine review from your average Joe shooter out there. So when I'm telling you these things, and when I have modified guns, they're because they are my preferences, okay? A lot of times there are things that could probably be changed, in my opinion, to make the gun a little bit better. And my philosophy is if I'm going to carry a gun, I want it to be the most effective and the largest weapon I can carry into a gunfight. That has just been bred into me from years in the military, okay? So if you're gonna go to a gunfight, bring enough gun, right? So that's my philosophy in making these changes, okay? I'm gonna try to stay away from criticizing those changes too much. I'm not gonna say a whole lot about the changes because it's not a review for those parts necessarily, it's a review for the platform itself. But sometimes the changes don't really need to be made necessarily for most people. Some people might find the stock trigger perfectly adequate, whereas I prefer a lighter trigger. Not necessarily a dangerous trigger by any means, but obviously a slightly lighter trigger might be what I'm used to, and so that's the change that I would make. I might prefer a different sight picture, therefore I change the sights, things like that. You also have the people on the other side who are completely against making any change whatsoever to a gun who might be used in an actual battle of some sorts. I don't really prescribe to that, and the reason is because I value my life over a court case. So in other words, if I make a change that makes the gun thousandths of a second faster from draw to target, that is, in my opinion, a change that is a life-saving change potentially. And I would rather deal with the ramifications of explaining that in court than being buried in the ground or having a loved one or someone out there buried in the ground because I chose to carry a stock gun that might have some shortcomings in whatever way. So that's my philosophy, that's the way I look at it. I did want to point that out because I know I always get critics that come on and they'll just blast a whole bunch of, oh, you're biased and I knew you were going to do this, and I can't watch your reviews because you modify guns and blah, blah, blah. So if it is, it is, right? So if that's your take on it, thousands of people out there reviewing guns, guys. So hopefully you get something from this, and I encourage everyone, don't just take your advice from me. Get your advice from a large bank of people. That's what I did as I, came up through shooting sports and as I kind of evolved in this gun culture here. So, you get your advice from a lot of different people, take your own input, find what works for you. That's the goal here, at least in my opinion. So moving on from that, let's get into the gun itself. This is going to be a review, and I've got to start out being real boring here because the 226, 229 series SIGs, there are 1,000,000,598 different types of these guns. So I'm trying to stay away from getting into all the boring nuances, but I do have to tell you a couple things, okay? First off, this is a Sig P229 Elite, and I'll tell you what Elite means here in a minute, Dark Series. So I think it's actually called the Dark Elite, and I'll tell you what that means in just a moment. It is also a Gen 2 P229. So let's start with the Gen 2 stuff first, okay? Gen 2 is basically the biggest change with the Gen 2s as opposed to either the 228, and I'm not talking about the M11. The M11 is actually a Gen 2 gun. I'm talking about the original P228s, and the original 229s in 9mm only carried 13 rounds. So the Gen 2s, the biggest change is the magazine capacity. These with the Gen 2, they carry 15 rounds of 9mm. So they changed the grip right in here a little bit. It's a little bit wider of an area. They kind of did some machining tricks and whatnot, and the grip stayed the same circumference as far as I know. However, the magazines were beefed up to 15 rounds as opposed to 13 because of that change in diameter inside here. Okay, so that's going to come important when I talk about the difference between the 226 and the 229 in just a moment. But these newer 229s do hold 15 rounds of 9mm, so that's the biggest advantage to having a Gen 2. Also, they have the full-length serrations up here, so they run the full length of the slide. The older models, the Gen 1 models, if you will, they have a rear serration that's very similar to this front here. Okay, so it's just kind of like a nub that sticks out and just serrated back there. Those are the Gen 1 models. So the Gen 2 full serrations, that's the easiest way you can tell if it's a Gen 2 model, because a lot of people don't, put it out there. And it's not like Glock. Glock releases theirs by gen, Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 5, whatever. Sig doesn't do that, really. So they didn't all of a sudden say, oh, the new Gen 2 229 is coming out. They just kind of started fielding these in, and this is the upgraded model, so it's been dubbed the Gen 2. Been out there on the market for a while. Mostly all your new ones are going to be Gen 2s. Just something to know, okay? So before we get too confusing and weird, this is a newer model, holds 15 rounds, okay? Next thing I'll talk about, this is an Elite, okay? So the Elite SIGs come with the short reset trigger. A lot of different model SIGs come with a short reset trigger now, which in my opinion should be completely factory on all the guns, but I don't work at SIG, right? So again, this is a Elite. So what makes it an Elite? This gigantic beaver tail back here is one thing. The frame is slightly different. It's got this big beaver tail, and I will excuse the train. It's going to run by here in just a few moments, so hopefully it doesn't drown me out too much, and it's not a real noisy one. But anyway, this has the larger beaver tail back here, this Batman style beaver tail. So a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, some people criticize this gun because they don't like to conceal this large beaver tail. I do not have an issue with the Elite series large beaver tail, and I prefer the Elite guns over the standard guns, not just because of the beaver tail, but specifically because the Elites come with this front strap checkering. And it's really aggressive, and it's an awesome grip up here. Now, they do not come with the X5 undercut like the Legion models do necessarily, but they do have the checkering up here, whereas the standard 229s just have the horizontal kind of siping up here. So they do not, in my opinion, do a really good job of locking the gun side to side. The Elite models do that in your hand as you go to draw. Part of it's the beaver tail back here, and part of it is this aggressive front strap checkering. So that's why I prefer the Elite models. And the SRT, the short reset trigger, is a must-have in my opinion on these guns. You can add it yourself. You can buy the package to do it if you have a standard model. But that's my 2 pennies on that. So if I were to pick one of these, I would get the Elite model. Okay. So with that said, this is also a Dark Series gun. These were only made for a few years. The biggest change in the Dark Series gun is supposed to be all black, and they have these special aluminum grips here. They're nice and grippy. I'm not a super huge fan of it. I didn't get it because of the grip, but it's all black. It is an aluminum grip. They're pretty grippy. They're actually made by Hogue. They're sourced by Hogue for SIG for the dark models. And it also had an adjustable rear sight. Now, the adjustable rear sight was kind of the Achilles heel of this gun, because the ones with the adjustable sight, these sights were known to come out of adjustment. These sights have been replaced. These are now Dawson Precision sights specifically for the Dark Elite models. And the biggest change is going to be that there's a bit larger recess back here, because the adjustable sight is longer than the standard 229, 228 sight. So just know that if you do have a dark model, if you have an adjustable rear sight model, they only made those for a few years, you might want to kind of watch that rear sight. Some people don't have issues with it. I didn't really like the sight picture to begin with, and also I didn't want to run into issues with adjustment on a defensive pistol, so that's why I changed out. Dawson Precision does offer some replacement sights that are specific to that model that fill in this area up here nicely. If you use a standard rear sight that's a little bit shorter, you're going to have a little bit of a recess up here in this slide. So just something to note, something to be aware of, and that's why this has Dawson Precision sights on it. Those are also the sights that I carry on my my competition guns, so I'm very familiar with that sight picture, and I really like it. You know, 2 thumbs up in my book on Dawson sights. They just work for my eyeballs, and they're really nice sights. So moving on with the rest of the gun, as I get all those kind of nuances and weirdness out of the way, if you're still tuning in and you're not drooling on yourself sleeping right now, here we go. Top to bottom, the slide on this gun, the action is pretty good. It's not as smooth as some guns that I have felt, and these slides kind of have a, you know, as they get broken in, they wear in a little bit more. This one's pretty good out of the box. Sometimes they can have just a little bit of glitchiness or, you know, kind of a weird feeling in them. It is what it is. I've never had an issue out of these guns, and I'll get into reliability in just a moment. But you know, the slide itself does have a pretty good action. The cool thing is it's got full-length frame rails. So that's one of the things the 226, 229 does come with full-length frame rails, and some people will attribute that to the better accuracy of these guns. While we're talking about this front, you know, slide here, I will also tell you that they're very easy to manipulate, and it's because the stack height is so large, just like your other SIGs. So it's very easy to grab a hold of, very easy to run malfunction drills because it's so tall. I mean, you have so much area to get your hands in there and really grab, whereas some of the shorter slide guns, it's a little bit tougher. You're working more with your fingertips as opposed to this one. But yeah, you can do that. The front serrations work nicely, so no issues there. Some guns have front serrations that are not that functional. This is not one of those guns. The barrel, there's really nothing fancy about this barrel. If you take these barrels out, there's not a whole lot to look at. There's not a real fancy crown on it or anything. It's not super thick, but man, this is an accurate gun. These are really, really, really accurate guns. That goes for the 226 and the 229s. I have never shot one of these guns that did not group well, and I've heard of people. Really, the only time that's happened is you know, if you get like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds through a barrel, and you wear the barrel out, they'll start spreading out a little bit. Other than that, these guns are kind of in the ridiculously accurate segment. I mean, you can pick them up and just drill the center out of a target. As long as your sights are zeroed, you're good to go. So awesome gun as far as accuracy is concerned, and I would attribute it mostly to the changes in this this upper slide here, and obviously the full-length rails do not hurt issues there. Moving on with the rest of the gun, we've got you know, the typical SIG manual of arms here. This right here is the Achilles heel that kills a lot of people on this gun, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. The front decocker is kind of it's a SIG specific thing. Actually, I think now Rec Zero maybe, or no, they use the safety as a decocker. But anyway, that front mounted decocker, that's a SIG signature series thing there. So your decocker is going to be separate. These are obviously not safety guns. There is no safety here. It's decock only. They do make a few of these models in single action only that does have a safety. They do have safeties, but you know, this is pretty easy. I mean, it takes a little bit of time to get used to where that decocker is, but once you know that manual of arms, I mean, it is an easy gun to operate. It really is. So we'll talk about the control layout next. Now, the layout of these controls is not necessarily optimal. The biggest issue a lot of people have, the Achilles heel I was just mentioning, is when they get into a grip, where this slide release is. And it's a very easy slide release to use. So, I mean, there's no thought at all. But you're basically, it's so far back, you're flipping this slide release with this first knuckle of your thumb here. So it doesn't involve your fingertips at all, okay? Not an issue. Very easy to use quickly, very easy to use under stress. However, what a lot of people do is as they're firing this gun, you know, they get into their classic thumbs forward position, they'll start riding this thumb in a little bit. And you heard me talk about this a little bit on the Beretta platform. But as that thumb might rotate in and it just kind of slightly rests over the top of that slide release, you're going to have those issues like I typically have with Glocks, where people will override the the slide catch and on an empty mag, and they'll run it forward. So just beware that that is something that some people just can't shoot. You just can't use the platform because of that, because they just chronically lay their thumb in this area, and just any little pressure is going to keep that magazine spring from pushing that up, and it's going to go forward on the last round. So something to be aware of with the platform. Now, as far as my experience, I have that issue a lot worse on Glocks than I do on these guns here. I don't know why. It has happened to me a few times, but I'm not like a chronic person with that problem. I know some people that cannot shoot these guns because of that. So something to think about. One remedy, you can either take this out, this slide release, because it is kind of a larger slide catch, slide release. You can take that out, trim it down, and re-blue it, make it shorter. Or you can simply look for a P224 slide release, which is the same one they used on the Legion. It's that kind of shorter one with the more checkering and whatnot. So that's something else you can do, and that is something that I did here. This is a 224 decocker, which is slightly smaller. It's the same one they used on the Legion models. So slightly smaller, it kind of keeps it up out of the way. The normal one hangs down a little bit lower, and when I get into a good grip with that decocker, sometimes I've got a very aggressive grip, as some of you guys know, and I'll cam forward so much that sometimes I would pin it down. I would pin down that decocker, and if you pin down the decocker far enough, you can have issues with the safeties in the gun. So even though you pull the trigger, it may have a light primer strike because you're holding the decocker lever down. So something else to think about there, the controls of this gun. Now, the mag release is probably one of the best in the markets in my opinion. Mag release stays nicely out of the way no matter how aggressively you grip this. I don't know that you can hit it. However, it's out far enough, and it does have an aggressive knurling on it where it's very easy to use. Okay, so mag release, very nicely done. These other two levers here may take some getting used to. Just know that coming out of the box. The gun itself is a blocky, chunky style gun. It's not super thick necessarily, but it just feels like some kind of a weapon of war. Not that that's a bad thing, but I mean, it is just a solid, thick pistol. Okay, so just know that if you really want a solid feeling gun, this is probably going to be more up your alley. If you're more into the light style, very, very svelte guns, this is probably not your cup of tea. Very chunky style gun here, so take that into consideration. We'll get back onto the grips next, and again, these are proprietary. These are specific grips to this model gun. So they do have some G10 grips out there you can get, which are pretty cool. They also have, the newer ones have the ergonomic grips, so it's that kind of plasticky sandpaper looking stuff, and that is really awesome. I just they're kind of aggressive. I don't really like carrying with them because they do kind of rub, but they are smaller in diameter. So if you want that the new ergonomic grips, you can easily replace these panels or really any 229 with those grips. So just know that they're out there, and they do make a very, very fun gun to shoot, very nice gun to shoot, very sticky, and very small circumference back here. If you have smaller hands, they really, really work well for that. I don't have smaller hands, so I don't really have much of an issue with these supplied grips. Okay, so moving on with the rest of the gun, we'll talk next about the trigger in this gun. Now, this gun does have changed springs. Now, I will tell you the 229s and 226s are oversprung as the dickens out of the factory, just like the Beretta M9 series, except the M9A3 has a better spring, and they finally fixed that. The Sig hammer guns are sprung all to heck out of the factory. I mean, they're very, very, very stiff. Very stiff, like stiff to the point where as you're working in the store in that double action, you're going to be like, oh man, this trigger is hurting my finger. So something to be aware of. The first thing I'd recommend doing, buying the Gray Gun spring package, throw a set of springs in this. Okay, my opinion, you can shoot them. I've seen people shoot them really well with stock springs, but they are definitely oversprung, and it's definitely a very, very, very stiff double action pull with the stock springs in it. So this does have the springs changed out of it. And again, this is the next step down. I want to say it's 17-pound hammer spring in this one. It's whatever the next step down from stock is. So it alleviates some of that pressure, but it doesn't make it unsafe by any means or run into any ignition issues with the primers. So here we get into the hallmarks of this gun. Now, this has been checked clear before I went on air, but just to make some last-minute safety adjustments before I do this. The hallmark of this gun is it has absolutely hands down, without a doubt, the best double action trigger that I have felt in a stock platform. End of story. I mean, that's that easy. It is the best double action that you can get, in my opinion, in a hammer gun, straight out of the box. It is a very smooth, I mean, there is zero glitchiness, nothing at all in this trigger. It is just a constant pull, no stacking at all. And with those springs in there, it's a nice, easy, it's just like pulling your finger through peanut butter. Real nice, easy pull all the way back till it releases. All of a sudden it releases, bang, it's going down the chamber. So nice, awesome, the best double action pull that you can get. Single action is no slouch either. Now I felt a few that are a little bit lighter in single action. This has a really nice, a little bit of a take up here. You're gonna come back to that wall. And at the wall, just a little bit more pressure, and it's a really nice, crisp break. There's maybe just a hair, just a little bit of wiggle as that sear goes to release that hammer. But very, very nice double or single action pull as well. Now here's where it gets into some magical stuff. This has the Srt Trigger. This also has the Gray Guns flat double adjustable trigger, which I'm not going to review. But as you watch this come out of reset, that is the reset on these guns. It is the shortest that I've ever fired in my life. I mean, it's literally just a breath off of the stop here, and you're right back into the trigger. So as far as shooting a gun quickly and accurately, the trigger in these guns is phenomenal for that concern. It is. I mean, you can rapid fire these like you would not believe. You can fire follow-up shots very quickly. They're awesome in that capacity. So real hallmark of this gun is the trigger, in my opinion. The second thing I'll talk about is reliability, and these are just absolutely tough as nails reliable. I've never had a 229, 226 not work, and as a matter of fact, when I was at the academy, someone brought in a 229 that was, I think, put up in storage for somewhere like 8 years. They handed it to him, they sent him off to the academy, he's shooting the gun, no issues, no malfunctions. He's like, man, my trigger's kind of stiff, right? I just don't know what's going on. It's a little bit stiff, it doesn't feel right. So I'm like, man, yeah, that's the most gritty 229 trigger I've ever felt. So I take his gun apart, look at it, and the entire assembly in here was corroded and rusted, where the strut goes for the hammer and the spring and everything. The grease in there had literally just turned into like a jello stuff. It was just dry and falling out. So I took everything out, cleaned it, threw some new grease on it, put it in, and it was running like a top. So I mean, these, even when they're in bad condition, will shoot very, very reliably. So bonus number 2 of this gun. Okay. Now we'll get into the magwell itself here. It's a little bit of a taper. There's a taper that goes into the handguards here, as you can see, and looks like a little bit of a front taper up in here. But they're very easy to load. I mean, you do have a little bit more notchiness than you do on some of your polymer guns and whatnot, but it is pretty easy to load as far as an all steel gun goes. No real complaints there. The grip is like the perfect length, I think. It keeps your hand off the magazine, so you can do those changes fairly quickly without moving your pinky or anything. But it's just barely, right? It's just like the perfect length as far as your grip is concerned. So another awesome feature there. Let's get into some of the data on this gun, okay? So next, let's look at weight and consider this has the Enforce APL-C light on it. So you're talking maybe a couple ounces there. So we're looking at 2 pounds, 2 ounces on my scale unloaded with this gun. So it is not a light gun. However, it does hold 15 rounds, which is the same as the 226, which is why I would prefer the 229 over the 226. It's a little more flexible in my opinion. But it holds 15 rounds in its standard configuration, just like the full-size 226 does. For whatever reason, they did not make like a Gen 2 update as far as the magazines were concerned on that. They didn't bump them up to 17 in the full-size 226. So you got the same capacity in this 229. However, it does weigh about 2 pounds, which is full-size gun territory, no doubt about it. It is nicely balanced though. It is very easy to point. It's nicely balanced, and especially after you get used to the tall stack height of a Sig slide, or if you shoot a lot of the 320s or anything else that's Sig related, this is going to fit your build very nicely. You're already going to be used to where to look over the side of this and how to point this gun. So very awesome in that category. There's a lot of weight right in this area here. So it's a little bit further out over the barrel, so it does kind of keep the recoil manageable. Because of the tall bore axis here, you're going to have a little bit more flip, but it is mitigated by the weight, so it's kind of a wash. I wouldn't say these are unmanageable guns to shoot quickly or anything like that. You're not so much catching the recoil like you do on Glocks and some of the stuff with the lower slide though. So just some things to think about, some shooting nuances you will notice as you take it out there. Tear it down for you real quick and get into some of the internals here, some of the other cool stuff going on. So these have a non-captive recoil spring. They do have a steel guide rod inside there, so it is all metal. And again, I'll take this barrel out here. It doesn't look like much of a fancy barrel. I mean, there's not much to look at, but man, these are some accurate guns for sure. All right, so there you got your slide. Just tough as nails built. It's almost like a better finished CZ kind of, just a really solid slide design. Not a whole lot to, that can fail. Everything looks overbuilt in there. And again, you got your lower here, your full length rails as you see. So nice real estate in there. And very simple. So if you take these guns down, take them apart, they're very simple. The mechanicals are very easy to work on, to fix, to modify if you're into that thing. However, I do not advocate the home Dremel gunsmithing stuff, but these are very simple guns in design, especially for as nice of a trigger as they have. So my take on this gun overall, I like carrying hammer guns because I know that I'm not going to goof up and accidentally send one off when I don't want to, because I've got that nice long pull, and it's not, the kinetic energy is not there to set off a round as I'm carrying it. I have to install that kinetic energy by moving the hammer back. Okay, it's not like a striker gun that's already pre-cocked. I also like the fact that I've got a super duper nice trigger once I get into that single action. Okay, much better than a lot of your striker guns out there. Once they get into that action. Something people don't think about a lot, and another reason why hammer guns are not something you should really discard is in some of these long range shootings. You're talking about some of these like theater shooters and whatnot. You see the hammer here has some serrations on it. You can manually cock this. So that's also something that if you have some time and someone's at a great distance from you, and as you're drawing, you can go ahead and set that hammer back so the first round is in single action. A lot of people are like, two trigger pulls to learn, yada yada yada, which it typically is in a defensive situation. Don't get me wrong, you have to train for that. However, unlike a striker gun, you can manually cock this, and it's not something that's very contemporary. It's not something people talk about or train to do nowadays. But if I was going to take a long range first initial shot on this, that's exactly what I would do. So just some other things to think about as far as hammer guns go is that you do have the ability, if you have time available to you and you have cover, you can go ahead and set yourself up to make that single action first shot. So something out there to think about as well. Again, I went into shooting impressions. Awesome gun, very reliable. This gun has had 0 malfunctions. My last gun that was a 229 Elite had 0 malfunction. The only issue I've ever had with any of the Sig hammer guns has been occasionally riding my thumb over the top of the slide return or slide release, whatever you want to call it, and it going forward. Okay, so a lot of different things out there you can buy for these. They do have 17 round extended mags or extendos depending on where you live. Okay, so I think the Dirty South, they call those extendo mags. But yeah, you can get the 17 round mags that work in this. Just make sure if you're buying mags of the 229-1 model. 229-1, those are the magazines you want for the Gen 2 style or the newer 229s. Okay, the original 229 magazines are 13 round, and they're extended, I think might be 18 rounds, but they are not going to be compatible. Okay, so just some things to think about. 229-1 for the Gen 2 models, 229 plain for the older models. Okay, So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Awesome gun. I do carry this gun, and again, I just prefer kind of carrying hammer guns when I can because I find them inherently more safe. I did have a friend that shot himself with a striker-fired gun as he was taking it or putting it in a holster, I believe. So, you know, those dangers are out there. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Hopefully, I covered this gun without getting too much in the mud. Keep tuning in. Keep liking, keep subscribing. I'm going to keep coming at you guys. Again, thanks for your willingness to watch me and to learn and to, you know, hopefully give me some criticism where it's needed. And just continue to look at these reviews, go to the range, practice your craft, and become better, guys. I appreciate it.